Welcome, everyone. Good evening. We will first start with calls to order. So we'll start with the Acton Select Board.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Acton Select Board meeting for October 25th, 2022 to order. It is now 5 minutes to 7. Thank you.
Boxborough Select Board.
Noting the time and presence of the quorum, I call the Boxborough Select Board meeting of October 25th, 2022 to order.
Acton Finance Committee.
Also noting the time and presence of a quorum, I hereby call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order.
Boxborough Finance Committee.
Noting the time and the presence of a quorum, I call the Boxborough Finance Committee to order.
And Acton-Boxborough Regional School District.
Noting the time and the presence of quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Now that we've gotten that managed properly. We want to note that this evening's meeting is being recorded by ActonTV for a broadcast at a later date. And thanks to Mark from the ActonTV for supporting us this evening. I also want to extend a thanks to Julie LaLumiere and Brendan Hearn from the school district for supporting this meeting in both planning and in technical support. I am so very happy that we're able to get together this evening and in this amazing new building. It's really a testament to what our joint communities can accomplish together. Our goal for this evening is simple. This is the first opportunity we were talking about it at dinner time, in most people's knowledge of the ability to get all of these communities together in person. We know that so much is lost in email and in virtual meetings, and relationship building is key for us to have a functional local government. I hope you all get the chance this evening to meet your colleagues from opposite towns and committees this evening. Secondly, as we head into our budget and planning for next year, we think it's very important to understand both the goals of each entity as well as the financial or fiscal constraints we all face. Our agenda tonight is structured so that we first understand our community's goals. That is followed by the realities of our current operational limitations. The format of this evening is really that of a workshop. The goal here is to share ideas, ask questions, and seek clarifications. There will be no public comment at this meeting, but members of the public are welcome to connect with their individual boards at their regularly posted meetings. And with that, I'll now invite Dean Charter, Chair of the Acton Select Board, to the podium. Dean. And if the committee chairs want to have a seat in the audience, it may be easier to see from there.
Thank you. On behalf of the Acton Select Board, I want to thank the district for setting this meeting up, and we certainly appreciate the tour of the new facility. The Acton Select Board looks forward to having a continuing cordial and collaborative relationship with the district. I might note here that both the youngest and the oldest members of the Select Board are both AB graduates, although our graduation dates are separated by almost 50 years. 3 of the Select Board members have had kids that have gone through the AB schools as well, and of course we all pay for them. So I would say that the Select Board in Acton is generally both financially and emotionally supportive of the AB district. My comments will be very general, and some of the specifics that I do add might reflect the thinking of only 1 or 2 Select Board members. We've not had the opportunity to have an open discussion about budget issues yet this year, but I'll share some themes with you about ideas that seem to have support, as well as our voted actions regarding issues such as our goal-setting process. Our goal setting takes place early in summer, after town meeting and the associated citizens' petitions have been heard. And then we have an extensive listening session open to the public to solicit their input. The Select Board then votes to establish short-term goals, those we hope to accomplish within the fiscal year with available funds, and long-term goals, which have a longer timeline. This year we established 8 short-term goals and 5 long-term goals. The 2 short-term goals that have a major immediate fiscal impact would be one associated with the reconstruction of our now 50-year-old DPW building, specifically the fuel depot as a first step. This is a shared facility between the town and the district, and the tanks must be replaced. We allocated $250,000 of ARPA money as a down payment for this work, and we'll be making a formal request of the district for financial assistance in the near future. Although most of our fleets may eventually be electrified, that will not happen during the remaining lifespan of the existing tanks. The DPW facility itself is undersized and inadequate, and actually predates both the former Douglas and Gates schools, which are now demolished. The second short-term goal is regarding the fate of the Asa Parlin House behind Town Hall. As you may remember, the proposed CPA funding to advance that project was defeated at town meeting this year. Our long-term goals include continuing progress on the Climate Action Plan implementation, which is being incorporated into our 10-year capital plan, and continuing to advance the Complete Streets intersection improvements along Main Street, including the Prospect and Main intersection and the Hayward and Main intersection. Both intersections have been problems for years and impacts the efficient and safe passage of vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians, be they residents, students, commuters, or school buses. The town manager and his staff have done an excellent job of producing a 10-year capital improvement plan that gets refined every year. This gives us a financial roadmap moving forward about what major expenses are on the horizon, and we can envision our strategy of how to move ahead as older debt is retired. This is also useful when presented with sudden influxes of cash, such as the recent ARPA funds, to avoid a financial feeding frenzy that might not look at the long-term goals. We have tried very strictly to keep our spending in line with the capital improvement plan, and I expect we will continue to do so. The manager is very aware of the problems of rising fixed costs, specifically regarding the assessment for Middlesex retirement system and increasing health care costs. These two budget drivers will likely severely curtail much in the way of new programs or capital projects for the next year or so. The senior population continues to grow at a faster rate than the rest of the population of Acton. And we now have 5,570 seniors as defined by state. Excuse me. We need to look at both the sorts of services these folks need and how we can limit tax increases to let these folks stay in their community. This year we allocated $75,000 from ARPA towards startup costs for an innovative meal program that we'll be starting at our senior center. While we are supportive of the AB district, we also recognize the excellent education available to Acton students at Minuteman, which seems to be attracting an increasing share of Acton students. As the students make their choices, there will be a natural shift in funding between the two districts. With the impact of climate change, the need for carbon sequestration, and the growth of our urban forests, I can envision a need to increase our staffing in our Tree and Grounds Division in Public Works. Just the increase in miles of sidewalk, now over 50 miles in Acton, and the maintenance needs for the 2 rail trails dictate a need for a larger crew. Additionally, we are trying to take a more proactive approach towards all roadside vegetation maintenance. Regionalization. The town continues to pursue opportunities for regional services. A good example was town meeting approved the Regional Emergency Communications Center, which will be shared between Acton and Concord. We also now have a shared veteran service officer with Boxborough. We share some local inspectors with the town of Littleton. And we use Regional Housing Service Office that's shared with about 8 towns. So I expect this sort of regionalization for efficiency and cost savings will certainly increase. Finally, although there has been no formal discussion of the topic, I do not sense any support for a Proposition 2.5 override anywhere in the immediate future. Thank you again for convening this event, and I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Dean. Before you have a seat, are there any questions from the audience? If there are, please come up to this center mic. It's already turned on, and we'll do our best to answer any questions from the boards or committees. Come on up, John.
John Markowitz, Boxborough Select Board. Dean, thanks for your presentation. I just have a question. Who's managing your ARPA funds at the town hall?
Well, excuse me, the town manager and our finance department takes the lead on that, but they have allocated a certain portion of it to some professional accounting help as well, because the rules are an ever-changing.
Yes, they are. And what's the amount of ARPA money that Acton received?
We started out with around $7 million.
Yep.
Of which about $2 million was transferred over to the school district.
Okay.
We actually, we did some pretty extensive public input and listening sessions a year ago, and we came up with an initial list of projects. We did hold some money in reserve, and then we went through the same process again this summer and allocated the rest of the funding.
Okay, because we've allocated our funds, I believe we had a total of approximately 1.7 million, and it might be great for the two of us, or not the two of us, but the two towns to get together to try to coordinate how maybe some of those funds could best be used.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the boards or committees? Great. Thank you so much, Dean.
Thank you.
I'll now invite Jennifer Campbell, Chair of the Boxborough Select Board, to the podium.
Hello, and thanks so much for putting this event on. It's been great to get to meet a lot of you people, and I really enjoyed hearing your presentation, Dean. I think it's great to hear what the other goals are. So tonight I'm going to share some goals that are things that we have set as a select board that we set in our meeting in August. So we are in the middle of a bit of a transition right now, as some of you may know. So we have a new town administrator starting on November 7th. His name is Michael Johns, and we're very excited to meet him or get him on board. So we will be making more formal outlines for some of these goals once he is on board. So overall, some of our goals are transparency. We hear a lot about transparency in open meeting law violation requests and other things, and just making sure we're providing the most complete information and reasoning to establish trust in the board. One of the other things we're working on is a code of conduct for meeting participants, both in the audience and board members, just to try and make sure that we have some civility in some of our meetings. Our number one asset in Boxborough is our personnel. We want to make sure that our employees feel supported and appreciated. We've had a lot of transition with that. Some of the things that we're working on, we will be voting on at our fall town meeting coming up, whether or not to establish a sick bank. So that's something that's one of our non-salary based ways to incentivize and make people, feel like Boxborough is a great place to work. We've also worked on some of our benefits, expanding family leave to ensure that it covers adoption and pregnancy loss, as well as morning leave, and the town offices are now closed on Fridays, so people have a day to get their work done, either in the office or by doing remote work. And we're also working on some of the other non-salary ways to incentivize people, like giving them transfer station stickers so they're living out of town. And then reviewing the town facility layouts just to make sure we're making the best use of the space we have. So if the personnel is our biggest asset, obviously the heart is our community. A couple of the projects that we're working on and our focuses are, one is water quality. We do not have a public water source in Boxborough, and we have an environmental justice issue in the 495 corridor, which happens to be a lot of condos and apartment buildings. And so we have a water resources committee that is working on those issues, just like Dean was saying about Acton, we're looking into a lot of regionalization kind of opportunities, including an intermunicipal agreement with Littleton to share some water. The other community aspect, which relates to our students, is that a few years ago, Boxborough decided not to remain a member town at Minuteman, which means that our students do not have priority in getting in. This year, we had 11 students from Boxborough who applied to vocational technical schools, either Assabet, Minuteman, or Neshoba. One as far as away as Essex, which I guess is in Danvers. And that was the one that someone was accepted to, and they decided not to go because it's too far. So we are exploring rejoining a vocational technical school. We're going to be looking at all of our policies and procedures, making sure that we're using our volunteers to the best. We've struggled with some of our committees because people don't feel appreciated and they don't want to join necessarily. So we had one committee, our Public Ceremonies and Celebrations Committee, and when the long-serving members, we were very grateful for their service, decided not to continue, we had difficulty filling those spots. And luckily, another committee signed up to do some of their work. Working also on, for procedures, we don't have much of a disaster recovery program besides what's been done with our public safety. So that's going to be one thing we work on, is making sure that we have redundancy in services and plans and that everyone's procedures are codified. And we'll also be looking at regionalization for our dispatch as well. And just the last thing that we will be working on that we set as a goal was just IT services in general. Part of transparency is making sure that our website is better at being searchable. So looking at some kind of a back-end document management system or something like that. I know that someone from Boxborough is talking to the school about some shared IT services for on-call. And we'll be looking at increasing opportunities for remote and hybrid meetings using ARPID funding, and just making sure that our systems are secure and accessible. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Any questions for Jennifer, the Boxborough Select Board?
Okay.
Great, thank you. Up next is Kira Wilson-Cook, and I'm going to get her slides going. Yeah.
Of course, mine is the most high maintenance. My apologies. Hey. Okay, great. I get a button. Does that? Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. I'm here to talk about the strategies and goals of the school district. Adam is going to do a much better presentation about the money part and how we're going to fund all of these big goals. But what I'm here to do is to lay out the work. And the first thing I want to do is contextualize what it is that we are up against, and then we will go into what our goals are. If you have not seen this graphic, this is the district strategy from now until 2026. It is a Venn diagram of all of our good work, all of our major goals, and you'll notice that here in the middle, this is the most important thing that we are doing as a school district, which is creating belonging and positive relationships, not only between our students and their peers, and our students and their teachers, but also within our community in general. And all of the aspects of this strategy touch this larger goal. So be it implementing the multi-tiered systems of support, which I will talk about, be it expanding the diversity of our workforce, be it working harder on inclusive practices, be it working on our socio-emotional learning, all of these touch our work. And all of these are funded by our budget. The context for this big strategy is still was and is still COVID. So let's do a little bit of recent history. We had an interrupted school year, a school year where we all started in a world that was regular, and then all the babies came home, and we had to pivot very quickly to remote schooling. We all had to deal with being new students, new families, new parents, new neighbors, in a new reality. Then, the next year, so this would be your 2020 into 2021, did I do that right? I'm gonna call that our crisis learning year. No, did I do that wrong? Was that 2020 to 20? No, I did it right. Jason shook his head, it was Jason's fault. I'm gonna call that the crisis year. That is the year when we were either hybrid or we were remote, right? We were still trying to figure out how to be students, how to be families, how to be neighbors, how to be towns, and teach our children in a new context, right? And we have seen the echoes of what that crisis schooling has done for our students, right? And we're gonna talk a little bit about how we've been able to maintain, by miracles and on the backs of our teachers and their great skill, a level of excellence in education, but we know that that did not work for every student and every family. Last year was a return to full school. It was a return to abnormal. We had masks. We had students with deep socio-emotional needs. We had students who came back to school or just started school not knowing how to do school. And though we were a school district that was ready to take those students, and we were teachers who wanted to bring those kids back and give them everything that we knew that they needed, we could not do that because the context was still abnormal. This is the first year where teachers are reporting that it actually does feel normal, but it's still not normal because the gaps are real. And so I want to make sure that we understand that wider context. It's not just one school year. It is a cascading effect of the original interruption and the echoing crisis as we go. Despite that disruption, our assessments have shown, so that's your MCAS, that's your iReady, that's your internal assessments, that we have still had growth and sustainability overall, though we do have groups and cohorts that are not achieving the way that we want them to. And so our job as a school district and as a school committee is to move around those resources and make sure that we are touching those students and making sure that they get what they need as we go forward. I'm gonna give you a quick look at our priorities and then I'm gonna go deeper. So, our pretty much number one priority at this point, outside of the straight delivery of academics, which is what we do, that's what schools do, is have a continued focus on socio-emotional health for our students. They cannot learn, they cannot achieve if they do not feel safe, if they do not feel stable, if we have not met their needs internally. We're going to fully implement the multi-tiered system of support, and I know that for y'all who are not educators, that means nothing. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to renew a focus, and when I say renew, I actually mean maintain, a focus on a culture of belonging and cultural responsiveness within the district. In other words, kids can't feel safe if they don't feel like they belong. We need to invest resources to make sure that that happens. We are doing that work. We've been doing that work. We continue to do that work. Goal number one, these were actually voted last week, yes, Adam? Thank you, by the school committee as presented by the superintendent. I'm gonna read the goal out loud and I'm gonna tell you what we've been doing. So, to improve social, emotional, and mental and behavioral health outcomes for students by shifting our environments, practices, and supports so that students can more effectively access learning and cultivate constructive relationships. We are making sure that we are providing professional development for our teachers so that they can have trauma-informed classrooms. That means that we are actively meeting our students where they are. We are meeting our students post-COVID crisis, but in the continuing echo of COVID. We are elevating existing district roles. Really specifically, we elevated a district role that was on a school level and made it a senior level position, so that way mental health advocacy could be at central office. We are performing robust evaluation, revision, and implementation of advisory in our junior and senior highs. And we actually created teacher teams to spearhead that work, so it came internally. And if you've not watched our school committee meeting from early in September, mid-September, that talked about the miracle that is Cartwheel, I invite you to do that. So we are working with a startup company that gives our students rapid access to mental health care if they need it. Those of you who might be in the know that getting access to mental health care right now will involve 6 months of waiting. It's not really possible right now, but because of our partnership with Cartwheel, we're able to give parents access to not only rapid care, but rapid, excellent professional care, where they can get it within, Peter, 5 days, and stay on it for a few months, right?
Months, and then they will transition students who need long-term care to a long-term care provider.
This is a miracle, and it's being used, and it's excellent. Goal 2, increase the number of students on a pathway to proficiency in literacy and mathematics through implementation of the multi-tiered system of supports. I'm so glad that my former colleague Diane Baum is here, and I'm so glad that Tessa McKinley is here. They both spearheaded these programs to make sure that we had excellence in literacy and better literacy access for all of our students. As we tackle the needs of our students, especially around dyslexia and other literacy-based special needs, having better and different infrastructure for students to have this access is important. So I want to thank my colleagues and former colleague for that. Every single one of our elementary schools currently has a math and reading specialist to support our students. These are not coaches. These are folks who are pulling kids out of class. We're going to talk about that in a second. But they are supporting students who need the extra help. We are increasing instructional coaching to support our educators in their delivery and in their data collection and analysis, because creating a culture of data means that we can better track how our students are doing. We are strengthening and supporting that cultural responsive instruction in all classrooms. We're creating opportunities for small group instruction to address the gaps that we know are there. I spoke with our deputy superintendent of curriculum and instruction today, and she talked to me about how we want to do better about pulling kids out of classrooms. We want to make more infrastructure where kids are staying in classrooms and getting the help that they need. And part of doing that is with this small group instruction. And finally, fostering and supporting teachers in doing deeper collaboration, cross-role, and cross-level will also be very important for that. And what you should just know when I say multi-tiered system of support, just a big jargon word, is that we are changing our philosophical approach to how we teach our students. So this is something that we've actually been working on. The school committee has been working on this for 4 years, right? This has been around for a minute. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, 7 years, right? It's an approach that is used by multiple systems, right? And we're just getting started, but because we're getting started, we're also seeing results. So you will hear this term a lot, and basically what it means is that we are rewrapping our work and our curriculum and our infrastructure and centering our students in a different way, differently than we've ever done before. Finally, goal 3. Improve students, staff, and family sense of belonging by strengthening school culture and climate, diversifying the professional staff, and intentionally implementing culturally responsive instructional practices and materials. Students cannot learn if they do not feel like they belong. Students cannot learn if they do not feel safe. We are investing in that. We have been investing in that, and we will continue to invest in that. This goal is a very big goal. This means that we're doing professional development. We are making culturally responsive teacher leaders for each of our schools. We're empowering our educators to examine policies and classroom practices critically through a racial lens, through multiple lenses. I'm just going to put through diverse lenses, specifically through SEED training, but there's others in there. Conduct a comprehensive district-wide survey of students, family, and staff twice a year. You've probably gotten that email. If you haven't, let us know, and then fill it out when you get it. Coordinate professional learning opportunities for culturally responsive practices for each school. Explore the development of a community welcome center in partnership with community organizations. I believe that we've reached out to some leaders about that. We are continuing our partnership with the DEI Family Advisory. I don't think that there's anybody here who's served on that, but hopefully if you're watching, we say thank you. And continuing our initiatives for diversifying our workforce. We made a beautiful video last year. Our recruitment efforts did work well, and we are continuing that this year. I think that's the end of my slides. Yes.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you.
Questions from boards and committees?
It's a lot, y'all. I'm gonna go back to that big slide with all the things. It all comes down to this. And I know that this is really big and it looks complicated, but it's not. Ultimately what it is we gotta make the babies feel safe. We have to make them feel stable. The money that you invest to make these beautiful buildings and to support the schools ultimately trickle down to that monumental and really key idea. Just the babies cannot learn if they do not feel safe. The babies cannot learn if they do not feel they belong. The babies cannot learn if they're not in the classroom. We are reshaping what we do so that they're there and they feel safe and they feel like they're in relationship with the people around them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will now invite Adam Nolde, Chair of the Acton Finance Committee, to the podium. And while he does an introduction, I'll get the slides ready. Sure.
Thank you, Adam. So I'd just like to be very brief. I'm going to turn this over to someone else in a moment. But I just want to say how honored I am to be part of this collaboration. My family moved here in 2016 specifically for this school district. So I'm particularly proud to be part of this discussion. Our Acton Finance Committee worked hard over the summer to gather the data, work with the Acton Finance Department, and put together our annual presentation, which we call our point of view, which really is just an outline of the financial situation of the town and the taxpayers. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Russell, last year's chair and our current liaison to the school board.
Hi. Okay. It's going to go great. All right, so thank you for letting me present the Acton Finance Committee's point of view in this setting. Given how large our joint school system's budget is as a percentage of Boxborough and Acton town spending, it's important for both towns to be aware of Acton's current financial position. We anticipate the facts that I'm about to present to you will have bearing not only on Acton and its town spending, but also on the joint school district. So given that, I'm going to press a button. Hey, that's a good one. Okay. So these are the topics I'll be exploring in this presentation. I'll bring each one to your attention, and then we make recommendations from our financial perspective. So the key points I'd like you to focus on are: one, our spending is predicted to outpace our revenues within the next 3 years. Two, our town reserves are strong and within DOR guidelines. The school district's reserves are currently below where we would like to see them. Ideally, they would stay above a 3% floor, but we all know that there have been trying times in the past few years. The town has identified many capital needs for the maintenance of town infrastructure that need addressing and come with potentially large price tags. And four, our taxpayers are feeling the impact of more than just increased tax bills, and we'd like to encourage everyone to consider all factors when thinking through spending decisions for FY24 and beyond. Okay, revenue, as many of you know, refers to the money that comes into the town in order to cover all of our approved spending. The largest sources of revenue, obviously, from the taxpayers in the form of our real estate assessments. By law, as you all know, that can't increase by more than 2.5% plus new growth, and that number makes up 86% of the FY23 budget. The next biggest revenue source at 6.3% is our debt exclusion. Taxed dollars on top of Prop 2.5. We all agreed to at our town meeting to add on to our tax bill for our big projects. For Acton folks, this includes projects like our North Acton Fire Station, this new Boardwalk campus, updates we've made to our public safety facility, et cetera. And the third largest revenue source at 5.1% is our local receipts. Last spring, we asked the town, school system, and Minuteman to give us their best guess estimates on what their expenses would be for the next 3 years, so we could better plan our recommendations. They got back to us with an updated ALG plan of projected costs and revenues. And based on these projections, we have reason to be concerned that without some strict cost-saving measures, our expenses will outstrip our revenues within the next 3 years. Please note the title of this slide is Projections. I want to be clear that the entities we're dealing with have given us their best estimates on their budget needs and our anticipated revenues. It's our job to make recommendations based on the information we currently have. At this time, it is clear that the projected increase in the budgets for Minuteman, ABRSD, and the town combine to exceed our revenues. These numbers do not currently include a use of free cash from the town or E&D from the school. As of right now, the school's reserve dollars are lower than we would like to see them, so for the moment, we don't recommend much coming out of that fund. That recommendation may change when we know more about their turnbacks. On the town side, our recommendation stands that they spend down their reserves no lower than 3% of the overall budget. It is possible that free cash amount would be enough to substantially close the gap for FY24, but it would not be enough to address FY25 and FY26. Spending changes need to happen as soon as possible to bend the curve back in line with our revenues as currently projected. So this is a people-driven town. The majority of our budgeted funds go to pay for our town staff, educators, and administrators. As this is the biggest budget item, and we remain limited by Prop 2.5 in our ability to increase taxes, it's vital that we consider the impact of dedicating over 3/4 of our budget to a fixed 4% increase. By locking in 3-year contracts with these increases, we continue to ensure that the only place to find savings without cutting personnel is to cut all other spending. Last year, the school district made hard cuts to staff in order to bring their budget in line with our available revenues. We have had several years of declining student population, so staff right-sizing is definitely something we think the district should be open to. That being said, we believe long-term financial security depends on budgeting closer to our available revenues, and a fixed 4% increase on 75% or more of our budget makes that difficult to achieve. There are things we know and things we're able to assume when looking to our financial future. We know that Minuteman is going to increase by 30% in FY24, 18% in FY25, and 9% in FY26. After that, we can expect Minuteman to level out. These years represent the last set of borrowing we previously agreed to for the construction of the new Minuteman campus, as well as the increased student population from Acton. We know that the Middlesex assessment, which is our retirement fund, is going to increase by roughly 6% year over year until we have fully funded it. This is a payment we must make, it's not optional, and we have to budget accordingly. We assume that health insurance costs will continue to climb. Although the last 2 years, the increase was around 10%, the average cost over the past 10 years is closer to 5%. So based on that information, we built a 5% increase into our model. But keep in mind that this is a projection, and these numbers can and will change. So once you've accounted for these 3 factors, what's left is the difference between those 3 fixed costs and our projected revenue. Without including free cash or E&D, our budgets for all other operations can only increase by 0.6% in FY24, 1.16% in FY25, and 1.39% in FY26. The numbers would all be impacted by an increase or decrease in the HIT assessment, an increase or decrease in state aid, and our decisions regarding our use of reserves. Those factors would only serve to close the gap for this coming fiscal year and would not address long-term concerns regarding spending versus revenue. And we strongly recommend all entities work to find long-term, ongoing cost savings in their operating budgets. In line with the Department of Revenue, it is the Finance Committee's policy to keep town free cash reserves between 3 and 5% of the overall budget. This practice ensures we stay in good fiscal standing with the state, maintain our AAA bond rating with Moody's and Standards & Poor's. Previously, budgeting practices had us dedicating free cash dollars to the previous fiscal year's budget with the assumption that turnbacks, which are certified in August well after the budget is approved by town meeting, would replenish our free cash back to a number above our 3% floor. For the past few years, the town has changed the practice to spend no lower than the 3% floor and use the August turnbacks in planning the upcoming year's budget rather than in the previous year's budget. This is a practice we would like to see in the AVRSD budget as well. We recognize that in the past few years, the schools have relied more heavily on E&D use than even they would like to, and we hope that cost-saving measures can be employed to allow a more fiscally desirable reserve position in the future. The third bullet on this slide is in regards to other reserve dollars held by the town and schools, and should we continue to a point where discussion of an operating override is necessary, we believe use of these funds should be considered as an alternative or means of mitigation before any override proposal is brought before our taxpayers. So part of our effort to provide long-term fiscal planning include thinking ahead on items that it would be unrealistically difficult to include in our operating budgets. The town and schools have developed capital improvement plans that identify large projects coming to us over the next 10 or more years. While we can't always know when an expensive HVAC system is suddenly going to quit on us, we can make plans to replace a 40-year-old roof, replace an aging fire truck, or identify the crumbling infrastructure of our DPW facility. These significant projects typically have price tags that would be difficult or impossible to fund inside of our Prop 2.5 revenue stream and are often paid for with excluded debt or loans. As you can see here, the town and school have some significant needs identified. None of these projects are a guarantee at this time. They haven't been budgeted for, prioritized at a school committee or select board meeting. They've simply been identified by each body as upcoming projects that will need our attention sooner rather than later. We think it's important that both entities are aware of the capital project needs they each have and when they're hoping to pay for them, so we can do our best not to overload our taxpayers. It's also important for us as taxpayers to know what needs are out there when making decisions on which projects to support when it comes time to vote at town meeting. This chart represents our current debt service payments of principal and interest per year. These are projects like those listed in the previous slide that were too big to attempt to pay within our operating budget. As you can see, we have a large dip in our debt service payment this coming year and another one in FY29. The dip in FY29 brings us back down almost to where we would be if we hadn't funded the new twin school. These dips would impact the taxpayer by a reduced overall tax bill. As we consider the needs shown on the previous slide, we must keep in mind that any approved project that isn't funded by grant or some other means would likely add on to this chart for the length of the loan and mitigate or eliminate the expected tax reduction. Future capital projects should be approached with caution. This town has Acton has done an excellent job in bringing in state and federal funding to aid us in our large projects. We've used Mass School Building Authority partnerships for school-related projects, community preservation funds for preservation of historic buildings, development of affordable housing, and the acquisition and development of outdoor recreational facilities, and we tapped MassDOT money for development of our Kelly's Corner project. This is one of Acton's strengths, and we commend past efforts and encourage the town and schools to continue to find ways to tap these and other resources as we move forward in addressing Acton's needs. And we highly recommend both entities do everything in their power to avoid spiking that debt service chart and the taxpayer wallets. So now that we talked about spending, reserves, and capital projects, we'd like to take a second to just talk to you about our Acton taxpayer. We have a growing senior population, up from 8.4% in 2010. Just over a quarter of our households have school-aged children, and 65% of our budget go to supporting the school system. These charts are meant to provide a frame of reference when thinking about the people who will be asked to pay for services both on the school and town side. Acton is clearly a school-centric community, known throughout Massachusetts as an excellent place to raise and educate our young people. It is also known for its history, investment in conservation land, and diverse population. It's important to look at the whole community when deciding which services to emphasize, and cutting too deep into services on the town or school side could drastically change Acton's prominence and character. Spending too heavily could make it difficult for our current residents to remain in this great town. And finding the right balance is the key to our success moving forward. Okay, so first, let's talk about why there are blank spots on this slide. We used to use median family income because it was available through the Department of Revenue and census sites. They have since switched over to reporting median household income instead, so we are slowly transitioning this slide. Now let's talk about what this data means. Median represents the exact middle of all assessments. There's some reasonable debate that average is better classification of Acton's tax situation, since median is a value that will move around over the years. But for our purposes, we're interested in understanding what percentage of our taxpayers' income goes to taxes. The census no longer tracks average household income, so we use median for this purpose. As you can see, more than 10% of our income is dedicated to our tax assessment. Since the census changed the way it was reported for FY20, we only have 3 years of data to observe trend lines. So over the next several years, this will give us a better understanding of whether or not we're trending up, trending down, or holding steady in the percentage of our income we pay in taxes. As you likely know, inflation is, or was when I developed this, at 8.52%. This is well above the long-term average of 3.26%. On the one hand, inflation has led to your home value going up, and if you've got a used car to sell, there's someone out there who will pay you handsomely for it. On the other hand, there have been significant increases in the cost of everyday goods and utilities. Leftover supply chain issues related to the pandemic, as well as the impact of the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, have added to cost increases on many everyday products. Residents are also likely to see a large increase in water bills as our water district moves to upgrade their water treatment plant to mitigate the PFAS in our water supply. And for those of you on Acton sewer lines, you will see an increase to that assessment to cover the cost of repairs to the treatment facility. These factors are not in the control of our budgeting bodies. These are other factors that will impact our residents and chip away at their resources for the foreseeable future. We bring this to your attention because, as we stated before when discussing the capital project slide, we'd like you to consider the taxpayer as a whole when building your budgets and not focus on just your piece of the pie. The $661,506 circled above does not include the proposed use of $1 million in Acton free cash, which would allow for an increase of roughly 1.64% beyond our fixed expenses. This would still leave us with a significant budget gap and would not serve to bend the spending curve to more align with projected revenues. Continued high inflation and healthcare costs will make it that much more difficult for us to maintain services within our revenue stream. Evidence suggests we're at a tipping point in our spending. Although the schools made significant cuts to last year's budgets, we fear that difficult choices will need to be made by all stakeholders if Acton is to remain financially sound. This is our conclusion. Our taxpayers are feeling the pinch. Inflation and healthcare costs will remain high. A recession is likely here, and the town and schools must manage budgets within revenue sources to avoid an operational override. That's it.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah.
Questions? Gary.
Great job.
Thank you.
Gary Kushner, Boxborough Finance Committee. As I was thinking about your presentation, and I don't know if this question is for the Finance Committee or for the Acton Select Board. In Boxborough, we talk about this new state rules around MBTA. Is that impacting, or how is that going to, because you're even worse, right? You have train stations in Acton. Is that going to impact budgets in Acton? Has that been thought about much?
I think so.
Which I hope it has.
This is, yes, it's actually just becoming prevalent on the radar at the moment and is going to be in a lot of our upcoming meetings for both the Finance Committee and I expect the Select Board as well. Preliminarily, we don't really have an assessment yet as to the impact. I know the town has put together an advisory board and we're looking forward to learning more about that, but we expect big changes, not just economically, but socio-economically as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a quick one, and I know that
Yeah.
I exchanged some emails with the two of you about this as well, and it's around the Minuteman assessment and where, you talked about a 30% and double-digit increases in their assessment. Of that assessment increase, how much of that is going to an excluded debt portion of the budget versus the actual operating budget for the town?
Oh, I don't have the number.
That's a great
It's
question. I
yeah.
don't have that on the tip of my
Okay.
tongue
It's,
either.
it's a large portion of that 30% increase. We are, is it, John, do you have the number? Give me a look.
I don't have the number, but the excluded debt part, while it's still growing, because they're doing their last 3 rounds of bonding, the biggest change is on the operations side because of the sheer number of students who are going to Minuteman. It's gone up 300% in 3 years.
Excellent.
I'll get the numbers for
Great.
you.
I think
Yeah.
looking at it as a portion of the pie of your budget, it's clearly a small portion. But then when you look at the difference and what
builds
the
on.
bottom line becomes in terms of available funds for the town, Minuteman becomes a pretty large portion of that. And so, and as I communicated this to you guys via email as well, I would encourage, as you're putting pressure on us to keep our costs under control, where the town of Acton is equally a member of that regional district as well. And to the best of your extent, I would share with them the same situation that you're in, because I feel that some of Minuteman is a fixed cost, but some of that is also their own doing and their own choosing in terms of how they want to put together their operational budget each year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who believe we're underrepresented there, and I think there's also people who would love to see them at the ALG table. I don't know if the Boxborough folks know what ALG is. It's a process that we use for budgeting, and yeah, we would love
Yeah.
to be able to hold them a little bit more accountable if we could.
Plus, they've made great efforts to expand the number of students that they can accept beyond what the original fit of the building was. And I guess we need to know if that's in line with what we would like. At some point, is there a student cap for Acton? So everything's on the table for discussion, but you're right, that conversation needs to be had with them.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
And I'll just caveat all that by saying that I think we all agree that the service that Minuteman provides to our students in the region is excellent. And so it's not that we're unhappy with the service that we're providing. We just want to give them the same information that you're giving us in terms of the financial constraints of the town.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody who wants some of our money should know what position we're in.
Exactly. Any final questions for the Acton Finance Committee? No, thank you both, Adam and Christine. And I'll have Maria Nealing come up from the Boxborough Finance Committee.
Thanks. Okay, so that's tough to follow. I don't have a big slide presentation. Thank you to the school committee for arranging and coordinating this evening. I think it's important that we all do understand where each town is coming from, particularly since the size of the budget for the schools in both towns is such a big part of the overall budgets. Our overall strategy for the Boxborough Finance Committee this year is really focused on transition. We're transitioning into having a new town administrator. So a big part of that is to ensure the town administrator coming in, we have a smooth process through budgeting. We'd like to work with the town administrator to create, the new town administrator to create a new capital committee, which we do not have. Currently, the Boxborough Finance Committee, Gary, has for years handled the capital plan for all the departments, and we would love to see a committee be formed for the whole town. This year overall, we're working to balance the overall needs of the town with the fiscal realities of the taxpayers, especially in light of what we heard at last year's town meeting not just in Boxborough, but for those of us who watch the Acton Town meeting, the concerns of the taxpayers. Our budget guidance to our department heads within Boxborough, we've asked the department heads to do a zero-based level service budget. The expectations is that all the budgets will be complete and fully budgeted. This year we had some difficulty in that. We're having a second town meeting to do some backfilling in budget line items, and we'd like to make sure that doesn't happen next year. This year we'd also like to make sure that we get as much as we can into the operating budget that belongs in the operating budget. So reoccurring warrant articles will be added to the yearly operating budget. For example, PPE for the Boxborough Fire Department and MS4 storm drain permitting requirements, which has been an ongoing yearly warrant article. This year, it will be put into the budget. We added a great deal of staff last year to the town, and this year, we are looking at level service, no new headcount unless there's an exceptional reason that someone would need to add headcount. For the school committee, we really are looking for a level service budget with a very modest increase to the assessment. It's in keeping with what we heard from the taxpayers in both communities in May. Boxborough cannot sustain an increase equal to that was last year. Having said that, we're also aware of all of the things that Kira went over and the importance of making sure that we have the services for the students, particularly coming out of COVID. So it sounds as if the Acton FinCom's on the same page. There may have to be tough cuts. If there is, it's really important to us that the cuts are not necessarily student-facing. So if cuts need to be made, there's a lot. It's a $100 million budget. We're hoping there's line items that don't actually affect the students directly. I know that everything affects the students directly, but administration, various other areas. Not capital, because when I sat on the school committee, what we didn't do is properly fund our capital expenditures every year, and then we had maintenance issues going forward. With respect to contract negotiations, I think it's important that both towns' opinions are heard throughout the entire process. And again, while we're sensitive to the current labor market, we're sensitive to CPIU, we understand and have seen what other districts are settling for. We think it's extremely important to bear in mind what the towns can and cannot afford. And we cannot afford, I think, either town, contracts that are very rich. So that's just something to keep in mind. And as we go forward, Boxborough FinCom needs to consider capital needs of the region, and I would love to get Gary had asked for a current copy of a capital plan, versus our capital needs in town. Right now, I've heard talk about Conant needing to be redone, but we need a public safety building in Boxborough. There's a possibility of a community center in Boxborough and various other capital items that need to be done. So we would like to be sure that as the region goes forward with capital projects, there's an understanding that on the local level, we also have capital projects that are pretty significant that need to be done. And that's it.
Thanks, Maria.
Okay.
Any questions for the Boxborough Finance Committee? None?
Good.
Thank you. Okay, I'm now going to invite myself to the podium to present. I'm going to take a page from Kira and step out in front of the podium. It's a little easier to see the big screen. So our I'm representing now the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee Budget Subcommittee, so sort of the finance committee for the school district. And what I'm going to share with you this evening is sort of two items. The first is the budget guidelines. Now, these are very preliminary. The budget subcommittee has reviewed them. We've not reviewed them with the school committee as a whole yet. Typically, we'll do that. We'll get feedback, and then we'll come back and we'll vote that at a subsequent meeting. And the budget subcommittee went through this. We've prioritized these, and the idea is to bring it here and share it with everybody and begin to get some feedback early in our process. So we have, over the past few years, come up with a set of guidelines. Some are long-term guidelines, and then some are more operational for the coming year, the coming budget year. So I'm going to share with you the 9 budget guidelines that we are proposing for this year. And the first one, and you'll see some X's here, is to limit our budget increase to a certain percent. So that is the number 1 item on our list here. You'll see that it's for the full committee to discuss. Our budget subcommittee didn't feel that we could come and bring forward that number without discussing it with the committee as a whole. Second on there, I think you'll see that we've listened to some of the feedback from other finance committees. Our second budget guideline is to target a specific use of our excess and deficiency, our free cash. And I will continue to have a lively conversation with the Acton FinCom about how we measure that and how we present that and how we may be statutorily required to present it in a different way than the Acton Finance Committee does, but we will caveat that and we'll make sure that while we may not be showing apples and apples, that we'll understand what is the genetic difference between an apple and an orange. And I think that may make John Peterson happy as well. The third guideline for us is, to Maria's point, consider the budgetary impact of collective bargaining agreements on the district's ability to provide services for its students. So we're in a negotiations year this year, so that again is top of the list for us in guidelines. Number 4, again, I think you've already heard this from other finance committees, and it's coming from the budget subcommittee as well, which is to evaluate opportunities to create organizational efficiencies and prioritize services for students, and then for us, including those who have been disproportionately underserved. So how can we find efficiencies in some of the non-student facing services and really focus those back to the students, and especially those who've not been served well in the past? And then number 5 on the list is to evaluate class sizes at all levels and budget to the degree that resources are available to maintain class sizes within school committee guidelines. And I'll share with you, at our last school committee meeting, the superintendent asked the school committee to take their policy regarding class size guidelines and develop it out further. Today, we only provide guidelines in our policy for the K through 6 range, and we haven't provided guidelines as a school committee for class sizes at the secondary range. And so that's something that the school committee is going to look at to make sure that we align those class size guidelines throughout and provide guidance to the district around that. So, first 5 guidelines here, all very much monetarily focused, financially focused. We spent time as a budget subcommittee putting these in order too. So you'll see our second list of guidelines are going to be more along the lines of what Keir shared for our strategy overall. So we want to make sure that our students have access to a robust system of supports to support their social emotional needs, their mental and behavioral health needs, and their academic needs. So that's in line with that goal around the multi-tiered system of supports. Number 7, to continue to fund the work to promote all students' sense of belonging through a strong and inclusive school climate and culture, again, aligned with one of the district's goals for this year. Number 8, to provide resources that continue to address the disproportionate outcomes for students who have been historically underserved by our schools. And then number 9, I think we would be remiss if we did not continue to mention this as part of an overarching budget guideline, and that is to continue our path towards tuition-free all-day kindergarten to the extent that it's economically feasible. And I think we had a little foreshadowing in the other presentations that we're going to continue to work on that, but we may not be able to deliver 100% on that in the coming year. So you can see 9 budget guidelines. These will continue to be discussed and fleshed out with the school committee. The majority of them in the top of the list is focusing on our fiscal constraints, and the second half of that list is focused on making sure that we're putting the resources and we're providing those guidelines to align them with our school district's goals for the year. The other part that I wanted to go over this evening, and I want to thank Marie Altieri for suggesting this, it was a great idea to just at a very high level share how our budget then becomes an assessment for our towns and what that interrelationship is between, say, a percentage increase in our budget and what that means for your assessments. Because I will share that even after 4 years, 3 of which serving on the budget subcommittee, I still learn every day how this works and the intricacies of this. So we'll start with a budget and we'll determine the assessment. And we'll look at last year's budget. We said last year for our budget for this year that we're going to increase the budget that the school district has by 3.2%. And for the most part, I'm going to stick to percents here. and this is just the percent increase. We then look at the non-assessment sources of funding. Those are things like state aid, revenues that we bring in outside of assessing the towns, use of reserves, and you'll see last year our use of reserves went up about 13%. And so our total additional revenue available to us through the non-assessment sources is 2.3%, an additional support there. So to come up with what the assessment will be to the town, we take our budget increase, we subtract out from that budget number the revenues that we received that were not assessment related, and we come up with our assessment to the towns. So a combined assessment to the two towns last year was an increase of 3.4%. So you can see our modest, I'll put that in quotes for everyone, modest increase of 3.2% last year turned into a 3.4% increase to our assessment. Now, for those of you who served on the regionalization committees, you could share with us all the wonderful math that we had about how we then split out those two, that number into our two assessments. But to simplify it dramatically, it is a rolling average of the number of students enrolled from each town. So, as one town has an increase in enrollment, their assessment may go up. Boxborough, being a smaller portion of that pie, a small increase in students may look like a fairly large increase to their assessment. Fortunately, we're out of the time of the regional agreement where we have to talk about cost sharings and givebacks and all of that. It's a straight-on average of the enrollment. So what does that mean for last year's budget? Amazingly, the 3.2% turned into a 3.2% increase for Acton, and Boxborough saw a 4.6%. So what we started here was a budget increase. We took out our revenues, we came up with an assessment increase, and we delivered assessments to the two towns. So what does that look like for next year? If we stuck with the hypothetical 3.2%, just to keep things even from last year to this year, another 3.2% in our budget, we've heard you, you saw in our budget guidelines, we're suggesting a reduction in the use of reserves, basically on average with what our turnback is every year. But that represents a 30% decrease in what we're using from reserves. And so the net of what we're able to take off of our budget through use of revenues and reserves comes out with a negative number. So our budget increase minus our reserves brings the assessment to the towns of 4.3%. What I'm trying to highlight here is the relationship between what our budget number is and then what it turns into an assessment for the two towns. In turn, that would mean Acton would see a 4% increase in an assessment, and Boxborough would see about a 5.8% increase. I'm seeing lots of eyes rolling right now. This was just for illustrative purposes. So we're thinking about coming at this from a different point, because you're coming to us saying your budget can increase by X, but really what I think you're saying is our assessment can't increase by X. So let's take a look at this in another way. For a point of perspective, what it means to the district if we come at this from an assessment increase. So let's again, hypothetical, don't roll your eyes, let's keep that 3.2% as the baseline, but we'll say instead of that being your budget increase, let's make that your assessment increase. So the assessment overall to both towns combined can't increase by any more than 3.2%. Same math here as we showed before. So we do get additional aid from the state. We're going to use less reserves. Therefore, our contribution from revenues and reserves is less. So now our assessment increase plus the revenues that we receive means that the budget for the district can only increase by 2.3%. So I think this gives everybody a little bit different perspective of what then the district needs to look at if we're driving a specific assessment increase. And I'll just fill this out here. That lands Acton at a 3% assessment increase and Boxborough at a 4.3% increase. Again, these are hypothetical numbers, but what it means when we need to drive our assessment increase down is that number drives very dramatically to what our budget can increase by. And Christine shared, on average, what our cost of people go up by every year. That's on average 4%. So we're looking at not even being able to support growth in our existing employee base. So this is what we're looking at for this year. This is what it means to drive a specific assessment percent increase and how that relates down to the school district. And the work that we'll be doing with the budget sub this year and the school committee as a whole will be to try to make these numbers fit and to make the difficult decisions to be able to achieve the district goals, but within the constraints of the financial capabilities of the two towns. Questions? David.
Hi, I'm David Martin. I'm on the Acton Select Board. Two fairly simple questions, I think. At budgeting time, are your revenues known or are some of them estimated?
The small revenues that we have, and I'm speaking under Dave's control here, the small revenue, increase in revenues that we have are relatively well known. The state, in terms of their increase in aid to us, does vary from time to time, but on average, we know that it's about a $30 per student per year increase. The rest of the revenues have been pretty well dialed in. Some of them relate to Medicaid reimbursement and interest earnings on investments, and sometimes those will fluctuate, as we saw pretty dramatically last year.
Yeah, I mean, the interest earnings have to be an estimate, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And the second question I have is, how does the budget sub or the whole school committee think of the relationship between class size and use of aides? You know, I know in last year's budget, the number of aides was reduced in some grades. And so I just was wondering how you guys thought of that.
I think it was a very difficult decision for us to come to that last year. And I think that it's something that the school committee will need to discuss as a whole in the coming years. I also think that given the dramatic change that it's made in our school buildings, that the committee is probably unlikely to continue to look at that as a source of savings.
You know, but it specifically is relating to class size. So if you increase class size, does that mean you put further, I'll call it pressure on wanting to retain as many aides as possible? Or if you reduce class size, does it relieve that pressure in you know, keeping as many aides?
It's a good question, David. I think that I'd have to look more deeply at the policy, but I think the policy relating to class size talks really about the number of certified teachers who are in a room, and there's no guidance around sort of other adults who are in a space. So the school committee, through its policy setting, really has no sort of say or bearing on that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
I feel like I should grab a microphone and join Adam so that together we can be a palindrome. It's the second time this week I've used that joke. If you'll go back to slide 6,
Yeah.
and I love playing Captain Obvious, I would really love to know what kind of discussions you guys have in your subcommittee. If you look at this from the perspective, if you say that the bottom line where Acton is projecting that you'll have 0.64% to spend for fiscal year 24. Have you guys done that math, and what kind of discussions come about?
That's for both municipal and school.
Right. So
I can answer the question. We're literally, you know, splitting pennies here. I think what I would say is the budget subcommittee has not looked at that yet. I think typically what we go to the district with, and obviously you saw what our guidelines are uncommitted in terms of the actual numbers. We've typically looked at what was a 3% increase because we sort of knew on average that was what the town could support for us. I think the information that you've provided tonight, particularly for those members of the school committee who haven't been able to take advantage of seeing your point of view presentation yet, is a new piece of information. And it's something that we'll have to discuss as a school committee as a whole in terms of what it looks like, and if that's the guidance that we're going to go to the district with, to the administration, and say, come to us with a 0% increase budget effectively.
Jason Cole, Acton FinCom. Question, when does the teachers' union contract normally settle? Is it, you know, the night before, you know, June 30th, the day before the next year, or is it usually done earlier on?
Jason, I couldn't answer that. I'm looking to Marie. I think what I would say generally is that we have an excellent relationship with the ABEA, and so the negotiation process is on average sort of a smooth one that resolves itself well in advance of when we need to have that information in place for our budget planning.
Because that's a huge driver of your budget for this next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, Marie?
I mean, there is no average and usual in this process. I will tell you, we started early. The contracts expire next June. We did a lot of our pre-work in the spring, and we are actively negotiating at this point. There's no telling. There have been years when it settled in January, February, March. There are years when it's gone into the next year. You just don't know. And the tougher the economic times, sometimes the longer it might last.
All right, any final questions for the school committee, budget subcommittee? Thank you all. What I will do now is I'll invite the chairs to come back up. If anyone has any closing comments, I would welcome those. If not, we'll have the chairs come up and we will have to go through and look for motions to adjourn from each of the committees and take the votes, and we'll do that in the same order that we started the evening. So we'll start with the Acton Select Board.
I'll accept the motion from the Acton Select Board to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Boxborough Select Board.
Do I have a motion from the Boxborough Select Board to adjourn? One of you guys want to change that to a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Les Fox moved and John Markowitz seconded. Thank you. All right, yep, we're all set.
Great. Acton Finance Committee.
Thank you. Isha, I'll accept a motion.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? No nays. Thank you.
Okay. Motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Becky and Priya. Sorry. Vote? All those in favor, thank you. None opposed. Okay, we're adjourned.
And the school
Before
committee.
you take the school committee motion, can I make one request of the group? If you made a motion or a second to adjourn, if you're part of the select board or FinCom, Beth Petter in her retirement was kind enough to come and do minutes for this. If you made a motion, could you please see her at the end to make sure she has your name spelled correctly and all of that reported accurately, just for her own sake. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Beth.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions, et cetera? We're all set.
Thank you all so much for coming this evening.
Thank y'all.